only going to come up here, or Emily and I agreed as anyway, if we had somebody of a rather younger generation that would come and join us, because we thought, well, it might be a good idea if we had a little bit of a spokesperson, Sophie, from a younger generation who might be interested in food.
Well, this is the last session for the day before we move into reflections. And just firstly, thanks very much for joining us, Sophia. It's really cool to have you up here. And
It's my pleasure.
And so what we thought we'd do here is just have a couple of minutes for introductions. I won't introduce on behalf. I'll let everyone here introduce themselves. Then I'll pose a couple of questions that have come out throughout the day. And then the remainder of the time, we'll have an open, collaborative discussion with the participants in the room in a co-creation session. So I'll start at this end and we'll work our way down for the introductions.
Kia ora, my name is Kay Baxter, and my life journey has been about health, basically. When I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I'd had cancer twice, all my teeth out, most of my thyroid out, 4 cesareans, ulcers across both my scar tissue, across both my eyes, and I've spent my whole life researching what makes health, what creates healthy people, and I'm really excited about the journey that along the way has been like introduction to the we did the first permaculture design course in New Zealand about 29 years ago or something, 84. And, saving seeds and heritage fruit trees, been a lot of amazing things that have been part of my journey. But I think the most exciting part has been the last 10 years in my life, where I've been coming to realise and understand that, permaculture, which there's going to be much more talk about that, is like a design methodology. So it gives you a way to make sensible decisions, common sense decisions, which work with the laws of nature. And so what I've come to understand is that when we reconnect, we step back into that process of co-evolution, we look at the ancient patterns, we look at the principles of science, we look at the principles of ecology, and we look to see what works, and we start getting the universal, the energy of the universe starts to support us and work with us, and you can create something a lot more powerful that creates health for all. So my journey now and my life now is about sharing what it means to me to step back into that process of co-evolution, which is about working with the laws of nature. It's really, really exciting journey and process.
Kia ora. My name's Emily Williams. I grew up on a farm in Canterbury, very traditional sheep farm. Of course it's not now, it's all cows. So the whole landscape has changed considerably. We used to swim in a river close by us. The river is now totally dry. Totally dry. It's really heartbreaking. My journey into permaculture started when we decided, when we had a young family, that we wanted to bring them up in the country, and we wanted to bring them up on an organic farm. We had a couple of mentors when we were living in a city area next door to us who really encouraged us along that path. So we moved to the country, and we've started developing an organic farming system, also based with permaculture and biodynamic principles in it. So it's been quite an integrated farm development, and no doubt a little bit more we might hear about that as we go. It's a great journey. We continue to learn, and we'll never stop learning as we go. So anyway, I'll pass it on.
I'm old enough to sit down, aren't I? I went along with that journey. It was the same one. I probably had a slightly different view of it, as we do. My comment in terms of who I am and where I'm at is that I actually feel somewhat in a different world to what I'm seeing around here, or what I'm hearing around here, actually. And I just do sort of wonder what sort of world I'm in, or where the world's going. And because I suppose, I come off a farm as well, and my parents went right through the chemical system, really, and out the other end. By the end of it, when they retired, they thought this was the most ridiculous thing that's ever happened to farming. And that's what my belief was, that industrial agriculture, I don't even want to hear about it. There's no solution there at all. I don't care how you adapt it. I don't care whether it's to do with plants, animals, insects, fish, or whatever. It's a failed system. It's only there because of a flush of cheap energy, and it's not going to continue. So let's get on to the real solutions, which have nothing to do with industrialising growing of food and giving ourselves good nutrition. So we sort of came into permaculture by sort of osmosis, really. And then later on got a little bit more formal education about it. But my sort of my background is that what so appeals to me about permaculture is, and this is why I see something that's quite difficult. I think it's hard to marry up ag tech to me, is because it's very observational. It's very grounded in the place you're in. It's very specific to that place. There are no rules. There's no toolbox. You can have a drop-down menu on, I'm afraid. You have to be out there with it, connected to it, absorbing it, responding. It's very adaptive. It's being responsible. If you are sensitive to what's around you, you will respond, and response means responsibility. You take responsibility. You use your ability to respond. So I struggle a little bit in terms of where I am in this situation with you, so you can ask me some questions about that if you like. But as Emily really said, our main aim of changing from the city was to have a good environment for our children and a healthy one for us and our children. And it was about that environment. And the only way to have health as people is to live in a healthy environment. And the only way to have a healthy environment is a very diverse environment made up of all sorts of creatures that support themselves and therefore will support you. So I don't know if that says much about me, but that's where I came from.
Hi, I'm Bob Corker, Kay's husband. We've been on a similar long journey together. I grew up in a rural community in Northland, and we had a valley there, in some ways similar to this, but otherwise quite different. But there was five families in that valley, and they all had small farms, and I was part of that community. And over my lifetime, I've seen that valley go to a point where there's no farms in that valley now left at all. And when I came across permaculture, I was totally wrapped in it, and I have been ever since. For me, it's just an amazing way of looking at the world. And as part of that journey, some of my energy went into, I was a co-founder of the Koanga Institute, and we put a lot of energy into supporting what I see as our biological, cultural biodiversity. And I've put a lot of energy into thinking about and experiencing and creating ways that we can integrate people back into the environment again. Because what I saw is that if we want to take a permaculture approach, so the integrated system approach to the landscape and the environment, then we need to get more people into that environment, because the permaculture systems are by nature more knowledge intensive, more experiential based, more people intensive, more management intensive. So to create those systems, you need people and you need organisations of people. So that's been a major focus for me. We essentially have all the technology in terms of biological agriculture. That's not an issue. Our biggest issue is our social systems that we need to change. So that's where I'm working, and we're in the process of creating the village up where we are. That's a Kotare Village, and part of that is risen out of our desire. We've got 90 hectares up there, and it's being put in a trust, and the trust basically says, let's create a model as to how we can have integrated land use and a healthy environment and a good place to live and productive and entrepreneurial community. So that's what the trust is about, and my job is one of my jobs is to make it happen. So, and later on I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what permaculture is, so in 2 minutes apparently.
Kia ora. My name is Sophia Royster, and I've been doing very well in school, and I've been having fun learning things, and happy to be up here, and yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us. So I've just got a couple of questions and then we're going to open it up to the floor. But I guess for the last 2 decades now of my life as a sustainability scientist, I've designated probably 5 to 10 years learning about the biosphere, so all the layers of the biosphere, how the soils, water, air interact, then pivoting and learning everything there is about business and entrepreneurship and government policy, and spending 5 to 10 years learning all there is to know about that. The purpose for me deep diving into this is so that I can find the leverage points within the system where one small change in one thing creates a big change in everything. In order to do that, you need to understand all of the layers in the data sets. So what draws me towards permaculture, and I guess the essence of my question is, it seems to me, given the principles and the methodologies of permaculture, that we have the opportunity to be acupuncturists and have multiple beneficial outcomes that we seek in the world, both for people and the planet. I guess there's 3 broad principles of permaculture, which is care for people, care for the planet, and return all the goodness back into the system. So just to give a bit of a framing from the wisdom that's on this panel, I'm wondering, Bob, quite a macro view, if you wanted to give us a bit of an outline of your understandings of some of the principles and the methodologies about how permaculture has these multiple beneficial outcomes.
Have we got that whiteboard pen?
It's just down here.
Okay. Do you want to hold that up for me? And okay. Oh, maybe I'll stand down here. Okay, so this is a classical sort of permaculture teaching tool. So in any system, there's sort of energy in. So it's the source. And then there's the sink, there's energy out. And in any natural systems, there's a whole lot of elements within the system, and they're connected in various ways. And basically, they're all sitting around there saying, I want a slice of that energy. So in any natural ecology, it's really efficient use of the energy. And the energy source for us in the past has been the sun. So for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions, well, for billions of years. Oh, sorry. Okay, so for billions of years, the ecology of this planet has been driven off the sun. That's essentially the only source of energy. And all these different things, all these different critters and components of the system have evolved to use that energy in the most efficient way and to share it amongst themselves in the most efficient way. So that's a quick picture of how biological, ecological systems have evolved. So what's come along is all of a sudden we've found another source of energy. We've found another 2 sources of energy in a way. The first one we found was forests. So we found we could cut forests down and use those as a source of energy and put it into our system. And we were doing that on an unsustainable basis. So over thousands of years, we've slowly crept our forest away. And then that took quite a while. But then all of a sudden, we found fossil fuels. And we could do things a hell of a lot faster. And this went into that system. And then what happened is we started to find that instead of having all these little dots here, maybe we could just have one big dot and another big dot there, and we could get just as much out of it. We didn't have to worry about all these lots of little dots and things that were there. So, but the problem with this is it essentially went against the the principles of ecological behaviour that we've evolved with over millions of years. We were trying to do something that's going to cause us grief. And this system of fossil fuels is only about 200 years old, really. And now we're coming to grief. What permaculture said, and Bill Mollison came up with the idea of permaculture, he looked at the original model, because he spent a lot of time in the wild as a naturalist, and he said, well, if nature can do that, maybe we can do it too. So that's essentially what permaculture is about. It's saying, let's design systems that have a lot of diversity, they have a lot of interrelationship, and they use the energy in the most efficient way. So as a permaculture designer, my job is to go into any system, and it doesn't matter whether the system is this building here, or this farm, or the whole valley, or the whole of New Zealand. It doesn't really matter. It's a system. We put a boundary around it and we call it a system. So my job as a permaculture designer is to say, what elements am I going to put into that design that are going to maximise the use of that energy and to look after the whole system and provide a yield for everyone. So that's permaculture in a nutshell. Everyone clear on that now? So, and we're going to apply the same thing if we're looking at heritage seeds or a biointensive garden or a farm or whatever. So a large part of my journey now is about, okay, how do we design integrated communities in the landscape? And we've lost most of those models. And just the same as our friends from Taupo were colonised, my ancestors were colonised. I was chased off my ancestors were chased off our land in Scotland. And the reason why they were chased off is because the industrialists from the south were able to make more money out of using Cheviot sheep, and they had less shepherds, and they didn't want all the crofters getting in the way, so they chased them off. So it's the same story. The story that we've been sold over the last 200 or 300 years is that industrial development benefits everyone. And some of that story was bought into and because there were definite advantages. But now what we're finding is industrial development has become a nightmare. We're actually dismantling the planet. So we have to come up with something different. And for me, permaculture is one of the few things which has really stood out and said, this is the way we do it. Now what we've got to learn is all the different strategies. We know that we have an understanding of how we do the design. Now what we've got to come to understand is what are the strategies we use in any particular place. And they're going to vary. It's not always going to be the same. So that's part of our journey. And for me, it's one of the most exciting things. And we've got this challenge in front of us. So we come from a totally different space than some of you here, which is really interesting. But I'm really looking forward to bringing our experience and our expertise to join with yours, because the bottom line is we're all in this together.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Okay, I'd just like to seed a couple more questions before we open it to the floor. One that's been on my mind all day in various guises is this thing of yield. It's been raised and all throughout the discussions today, and I guess I quite like Scott's perspective as far as, you know, if we are kind of undertaking a projection in scenarios of business as usual, then we do know that we need to produce more food in the next 40 years than we have in the last 8,000 years. WWF have just released this research. It's backed by a whole ton of scientists and data projections. So given that scenario, I'm wondering, Kay, whether you've got some views on yield with permaculture.
My understanding is that, I don't know, well, there's a man called John Jevons in America who's probably the most anal systems analyst I know. I mean, he's anal about collecting information and data, and he spent 40 years doing it. And my understanding is that the biointensive system of gardening, which is based on all the ancient agricultural systems which grew soil and civilizations, is many times more productive than any other system on the globe. And you can get up to 10 times more production for way less water, way less energy, way less everything. It's like there's no system more efficient that I've ever seen or heard of. And I've been practicing that for 20 years or so, and I'm totally convinced that there's no other system that comes anywhere near it.
Just riffing off that is water, and it's also well known that current agricultural practices are taking up 70% of the world's water resources, freshwater resources. So, Gary, I'm just wondering, you've got a reputation for your love of both two things, and I've heard it from multiple people, that you talk to Gary about water and spirals. So can you just, yeah.
Well, they're the same thing. Water moves in spirals, interconnected spirals. And I was very pleased, where is she, that did the thing about water? Great. I mean, so often we talk about food and we forget about water. It's water that makes all food do its thing, not be digestible, makes all organic chemistry work, makes the whole world work. It's water. And we sometimes think, oh, well, I'm growing good food, that's fine. We've got to have good water, good vital water, good properly energized water. And sort of stepping back from sort of my point of view about water, and I'm only allowed 2 minutes to talk about this, which is ridiculous. And then a few seconds have gone there. Is it basic? I mean, water is the basis of all life. It's movement, you know. Life is about exchange. It's about exchange. It's been something that's different, and water facilitates exchange. So everything that moves is to do with water, and if nothing moves, there's no existence. You just nothing. Sorry. So really, life is about water combining with carbon, which is a strange thing, and to have all these combinations and add all sorts of things on to make big, long molecules. And that's what life is, basically. So we really need to know what's going on with the water. So one of the first things we need about the water that's inside us, the water that we take in, and what's the nature of that. And water is a very strange thing. It's got all these strange anomalies. That's why it can do all the things it can do. It's not like other similar chemical molecules. And so it's the nature of water in many different ways. Water is just not H2O. You know, if someone tells you that water is H2O, we'll just say, what type of H2O or something. Right? Because it's very different and it combines in all sorts of ways and does all sorts of marvellous things. And so we need to think about not just as water, and not just whether it's polluted, but what is the actual nature of the water? What is the water doing in this environment? Because it's the health of that environment, we very much to do with the health of the water. And that goes for the oceans as well, which is a very interconnected water body, obviously, and life is very interconnected because it's all immersed in water. And it's also an environment we tend to forget, and surely in New Zealand we should not. That's our main source of food, and both plant and animal or fish food, actually. It's hugely productive for seas around New Zealand. And actually our land is relatively not that productive in terms of its mineral base and depth of topsoils. So I just sort of want to make a plug that you really think a lot about the nature of water, its energetic levels, its way it, you know, I could probably say it here, the way it memorizes what's happened. It's a very interesting thing about water. Memory is just something that it recalls what happened to it, therefore it changes what it does. That's what you do for memory, you know. If you recall something happened in the past, you change what you do. If you use memory in that technical sense, then water's full of memory. And it remembers where it's been and what it's done. So the nature of water is a really important foundation to me to life. And so just make that plea again. So thank you for the person who did that poem about the use of water and and how we need to look after water and how we need to relate to it, because as we relate to it, it relates to us, and it's the foundation of everything for me.
So one final question before we open things up. So given that our bodies reflect the environment and the environment reflect our bodies and that they are interconnected, I know that you have some unique views on this, Emily, around the nature of that connection, and that's something that we haven't discussed and is at the heart of permaculture, and that's love. And I'm wondering if you can share a few words on your views on that.
Sure, I love food. But what I love is good food, and a lot of our food doesn't fall into that category. And I love growing food in a good, healthy way. So that means really communicating with your soil and appreciating what really good soil is. So I've fallen in love with bacteria, basically. After they've had so much bad press for years, it's just fantastic to see that they're getting a bit of good press now. We're still told to wipe them off the bench, and dare I say it, but I was just told women have been told to wipe their nipples before they breastfeed. I mean, how ridiculous can it get? I heard somebody say that over the... It's just crazy. But getting back to food, my garden's really important to me. It's a meditation space. It's my best teacher, and I continue to learn from it all the time. And growing food with love and with feeling is really important, so that you're continually doing this communication thing with the soil, with the earth. And then harvesting it in the same way, harvesting it with care and with consideration, thinking about what you're taking out and then what you're putting back in, and replenishing what you've taken out so that you can continue this cycle of producing good food. And then it comes on to cooking that food, and cooking with love, and thinking about the people you're cooking for and what you're doing with it. And it's actually getting more complex, of course, to cook for people now, because you have such a wide variety of diets. We never used to have this, vegan and wheat-free and dairy-free and solanacea-free, and it's getting a lot more complex, of course. And I don't think we've got time to go into the reasons why necessarily for all of that. But I think it's so important, our food, but it has to be done with love, and we've got to get away from all this processed stuff and get back to what really food is, and grow it in such a loving and caring way. So do you want to add to that, Kay?
Oh, yeah, I would, actually. One of the really amazing things for me in the last 7 years or so has been, I've spent a lifetime learning about what makes healthy soil and how to grow healthy plants, but I've only recently come to understand how our food communicates with our bodies, and it makes a really big difference to a lot of things. So that's come through the science of epigenetics. There's a new science, the new biology called epigenetics. And essentially what that science shows us is that, the double helix spiral that we see in our mind's eye when we talk about DNA. Well, a very small part of that is what we call our DNA, and the rest of it our scientists called the junk DNA, because they didn't understand its function in our body. And we now know that is the part of our body that communicates with our food. That's quite important, and with actually not just our food, our water, and the whole environment that we provide for our body. And so the quality of that communication between the environment, which is largely food and water, but also thoughts, just the environment we live in, everything, the quality of that communication determines the strength or the weakness of the tags that the junk DNA places on our DNA, which determines how our bodies express in this lifetime, and how the health of our children and our grandchildren and so on down. And my understanding is that there are only 3 things that we know at this point that the junk DNA communicates with in our food. One is minerals, one is vitamins, and one is traditional fatty acids. Fats and oils, traditional fats and oils. So it's the levels and the quality of fats and oils and vitamins and minerals in our food which determine our health and the maintenance of our DNA. And really quickly, I just want to mention, and so the only research I've ever seen in the world ever which shows what we need to maintain our health through generation after generation after generation is the work done by WESTONPRICE. There's a lot of ideas about what will make healthy people, but I don't see that any of them stand the test of time. And I think as an older person in today's world, one of the things that I've learned is it's really important to look back, and that's the permaculture design. You go from ethics, principles and patterns, to strategies and techniques. And one of my big lessons, having been a vegetarian for a long time, was that there are patterns of what make healthy people. And it's not about being a vegetarian or not a vegetarian or whatever. It's about getting the right levels of minerals and vitamins and fat and oils. And so part of the whole health thing and permaculture, it all comes together, and everything, when you get it right, it all supports the whole. But there are some really important patterns coming out of science and coming out of the understandings of Indigenous peoples, which I think are really important for us to look back to. Yeah.
Thank you. Just before we take it to the floor, Sophia, did you have anything to add?
I'd like to know, how the salad is produced in the vegetable gardens and how it works and stuff like that.
That's a great first question. So does someone from the panel want to answer that? It was around how does the salads go from the garden to your plate, right?
Very quickly.
You go out with a basket.
Do you mean how do they grow? How does it become salad? Yeah. Yeah, that's what she means. How does it go from a seed to becoming a salad?
You want to know what we put in our mixture of salads, or what? When I go out to the garden, I will harvest lettuce, a multitude of weeds, a multitude of other greens, and put them all together and make a salad.
Are you talking about? I think she's asking something else. Yeah, how does it grow? I'll tell you how I think it grows. Well, my understanding is that when we plant a seed, it's really important that we choose a heritage seed because we need seeds that can communicate with the life in the soil. And it's really important that we have highly mineralised soil, the right minerals and the right relationships, and that we have lots of microbes in the soil. And the life in the soil, the microbes, communicate with the plants and the plant roots. And the healthier the soil is, the healthier that plant will be. And if we have a really highly functioning, healthy plant, that's what we need to maintain our health. So our whole journey is about remineralising the soil and creating highly microbially active soil so that we can create really vibrant, high bricks plants so we can have health.
Can I add something to that too, Sophie? And you may not realise it actually, that inside you, what you're actually feeding is the microbes inside you, down in your guts and in here. And they're very similar to the ones out in the soil there. So when that salad's grown on the land and taken up all this information and energy and other things that's going into your body, it goes into your body and very similar microbes down. That's why you ate dirt when you're young, you know, you went around, ate a bit of dirt and put it in you. Good idea, that, you know. Got those microbes down in your tummy, yeah? You remember doing that? Oh, sure you did. I'm sure you did that. That's what you're feeding. Just remember that. You're looking after your own microbes. That's what you're doing.
Great. Thank you all for contributing here. I actually have two questions. The first is the sort of modifications that you're experiencing to the permaculture approach due to the effects of climate change. Permaculture is obviously very grounded in the in being observational and on historical patterns, but unfortunately we're facing times when historical patterns are no longer the best predictor. So I'd just love to hear, you know, as we sort of try to apply permaculture techniques, maybe how do we think that the next 50 years might look a little different than the last 50?
The two strategies that I'd be working with around climate change is seeds. If we choose heritage seeds, they have inbuilt into them the ability to adapt to climate change, as long as they're grown in highly mineralised, microbially active soils. So the second strategy would be, it's about carbon in the soil. It's about building humus and life and carbon in the soil, which gives the whole system more resilience and flexibility and ability to adapt and change. I'm sure there's other answers to that.
Can I just make one comment too? I mean, if you just do the right thing and having a really healthy ecosystem, and that's how you get your food from, then it'll be resilient. I mean, nature does know how to adapt to these things if we give it a chance. You know, it's often enough we just got to get out of the road and let it adapt. And the problem is we're in the road. So it's not that nature doesn't know what to do, it's just that we're just getting in her road a bit. And so I don't see climate change is not a problem for the world or Gaia or whatever you want to. It might be a problem for us in terms of how we're going to adapt. So all what we've got to remember is to be adaptive ourselves. And that's what permaculture is about. There's no ideology in permaculture, right? There's nothing fixed, because it all depends on situation. So whatever situation you're in, you know, you can still apply the principles and the ethics, because that's the foundation. But the main thing is that you are continuing to adapt, you know, and that's what nature does. So should we.
I'll just add my bit. So, I mean, basically we're in a situation where we've either removed carbon from the soil and we've removed the plants that normally take up the carbon. So most of the carbon's gone up into the air. So if we agree most of the problems we're facing are because of carbon, we just got to focus on putting carbon back in and sequestering it. And there's lots of ways we can do that.
Cool. Great. The second question, just to take up time, or take my time, excuse me, is just, you know, you sort of mentioned the sort of difference of perspectives. You know, we're coming at this from very much a young student, you know, mind, and I'm curious, just, you know, if you were speaking to, you know, 10,000 engineers in Silicon Valley right now who are saying we want to build tools to enable the broader spread of organic biointensive farming, what tools would you invite them to build based on your experience of knowing the challenges that you run into?
What I would tell them to do is take a year off and have an internship on a farm or in a forest or something or other.
Thank you.
He echoed me entirely. I was going to say, come woofing with us for a while if you like.
My take on that is we actually need to start creating models for how we could do things differently. We've got most of the conceptual theory, we've got a lot of the tools and everything we need, but we actually need to start putting together on a social level some different models and seeing how they perform. And then at that stage we can either scale them up in terms of size or scale them up in terms of numbers.
Oh, that was a really big, strong hand going up over here. And you've got a T-shirt that says, yeah, nah, yeah. So Kiwi.
I was just wondering, I always thought permaculture was you needed a big farm, but you said today that you can do it anywhere. So I've got like 2,000 square metres. How do I start?
Check out our website where we've got a 200 square metre urban garden model happening to show how you can feed a family of 4 all the nutrition that you need on 200 square metres. And we just got a crowdfunder filled 100% 2 days ago, a week ago, to take it to another level. It's amazing what you can do in really tiny spaces.
And actually, if I can just add to that, one step at a time, 1 square metre at a time. Just take your lawn, liberate your lawn, put a few plants in it you can eat, you know, and don't try to convert the whole lawn at once and just make a mess of it, you know? Yeah. Learn small.
In the web address? Sorry?
www.koanga.org.nz.
Nick.
Thanks very much. I found your contributions really refreshing. And it seems to me that sort of like the some sort of question in my mind has been really the collision between the art and science and the trade-off between it, you know. So to me, the responses and your comments have been really about saying, you know, life is an art, and how I use the land and how I grow my food is actually an art, and I develop that art over a period of time, and you can't just immediately lock that into a scientific model to scale it. And, you know, I think it's a story that I've received a lot from various farmers around New Zealand, and I think it's an important point for us to realise that actually perhaps we're talking about something that isn't purely about science. Epigenetics is fantastic. I've been studying that in Amsterdam. Basically, the DNA that we inherit when we're born is only 10% of who we become. 90% of it's contextual, the inputs, the food and everything. So are we actually scientifically based ourselves?
I'll have to answer that. It's a nice philosophical question. Between the whole science and the rationality and irrational. We are irrational creatures. And I say that sincerely, and that's a very good thing, we're irrational. Because the world actually lives on irrationality, or non-rationality, should I perhaps will say it. You know? So science can be helpful, you know, evidence can be helpful. But like most things, it's the add-on. I mean, one of the things that frustrates me about our education system, to take it slightly differently, is we pump people full of theory from the age of 5 to the age of 25, and when you put these poor creatures out into the real world and they think they can do something, you know, all real teaching is done by experience first, theory later. Put a framework around it. Do a little bit more, put another framework around it, you know. So there's nothing wrong with science. It's a bit of a framework for our observations. But, you know, we have been farming for quite a while without too many high-tech, you know, science and stuff. You know? And the issue to me is that when we have used technology and high science, we've made a bloody mess of it, so put it mildly, you know. So, but I wouldn't say for that reason, therefore, science is not useful, right? I think it's an evidential basis is very useful. Trying to make sense of your observations is very useful, you know. Planning is a very useful thing to do, particularly in a temperate climate with seasons and, you know, how you feed yourself in winter and all that sort of thing. So.
Well, first, I really wanted to honor all of you, you know. Our farmers and people who take care of the land are some of our greatest heroes and heroines, and you know you should be on the celebrities on the cover of magazines. But in that world, we won't have celebrities. So, so thank you all. And I was talking with Kay at lunch briefly about seeds and the dilemma of seeds, because part of what's happened is basically we've commodified life. You know, that is at the core of this, and objectified it. And we used to have something called a commons. And if anything reflects that, it's our seed stocks. This is our collective heritage and something that belongs to everyone and to no one at the same time. And I think that this is something that is not addressed by our economics at large, that's, you know, representative of the kind of discussion that you're having here and the kind of work that you do. And there's even a layer that I'm hearing of what you're doing beneath that, which is really what's called ecological services or ecological functions, which is what runs the show on planet Earth. You know, oxygenation, pollination, riparian zones, clean water. Farming is actually at a different level. It's a byproduct of all of that. If you're taking care of your ecological functions, you're going to have extremely healthy and productive food systems at large. We had a fellow at Bioneers a couple of years ago, John Liu, who took the largest 35,000 hectares on the Lus Plateau in China that was utterly degraded. I mean, it looked like the moon, basically, after centuries and centuries of bad land management. And in 15 years, by restoring the water flow, basically the hydrology, they created a Garden of Eden that is also an incredibly productive local economy and food system. So I think that you guys are really working with those underlying ecological functions. And I just wanted to name one other quick thing, which is that so much of this does come back to the economics in many ways. And one of the Dreaming New Mexico things that we found, because how do you sustain small and medium-sized farms over time, particularly in a commodity-based economy, which is very erratic at best? And one thing is long-term purchasing contracts. So we discovered that the state of New Mexico actually spends 10% of the total food purchasing in the state. So we negotiated with them to make long-term commitments to buy local food. I mean, very straightforward kind of a deal. There's a cooperative in Cleveland, Ohio, in the States, also called the Evergreen Cooperative, which has set up a model of anchor institutions. They have been building local businesses that are often minority-owned or for disadvantaged communities or work cooperatives and so forth. So how do you have long-term stability? It's what's called EDS and MEDS. They went to the schools and they went to the hospitals, the healthcare system, who are anchored in the community, who are not going to cut and run as a corporation often will, you know, and they built long-term contracts. They now have the largest greenhouse growing operation, I think, in the country that is for, you know, at-risk youth and for, I mean, for all the right people, basically. So I think we need to look at the economic side of that, too, of how do you rebuild community in the economy so that's built to last, you know. So anyway.
Yeah, I would really like to make a comment on that because I think, let's go going over time a little bit more, but I think that's really critical. I mean, I've done a lot of work on the land and, you know, I came off a farm and I went to the city and I learned a few things there and that, you know. But one of the things that's really sort of got to me over, first of all, was the economy and the fact that it was totally corrupted and exploitative and privileged and all that sort of thing, which you know about. So, like, take some things out of a commodity, make land no longer a commodity, put it back in the commons or in trusts or whatever, take it out of private ownership, you know. But the other thing that really I've also come to realise is that in the end, like as Bob was saying, we've got all these things, we know these things, we even know how a good economy could work, you know, that would actually support the people and the environment and be just. It's decision-making, the collective decision-making to get there. What I think's really missing is the question of governance, the question of how we make decisions collectively to move from one thing to another, you know, because we can't move until we can make collaborative decisions as a collective, not as individuals. And I think that's what I'd like to see, a lot more sort of thought and even visioning on about. And I mean, I'm trying to do my little bit, and I've got some propaganda with, if anyone wants any. I'm a pamphleteer. I'm not a bloggist. I don't go on the internet, but I do it with real books on paper, you know. And so I think that's a real issue, this whole question of governance as well.
And if we have that collective vision, we can all work in our different parts of the world in order to build that vision and those pathways. So we've got one more question, and Christiana's been very patient.
So say I build a robot and I mean, because artificial intelligence is really, I was challenged recently in a tech workshop where they were saying, you know, the artificial intelligence is going to be able to write the most beautiful songs. Like, it's going to be able to create art and beauty and all of these things, not just to perform automated tasks. So imagine like a few years down the line, I build a robot, and that robot is fully trained with all the permaculture principles, but it also has observational capacities to notice the different dynamics as they're, you know, the light, energy, sunshine, you know, soil, moisture. And then that robot can build a permaculture garden, like everybody in every apartment everywhere with their little deck of, you know, 50 feet can have a permaculture garden that their robot maintains for them and then delivers like the fresh produce and harvests it into their fridge. And it's a good thing for biodiversity, and it's a good thing for carbon sequestration because every rooftop and every patio and everybody has a permaculture garden. Is that a bad thing?
Will be the end of life on Earth.
Yes.
It's all about stepping back into the process of co-evolution, which we've always been in until the last 200 years.
We want people doing it, not robots. But the question, what I've said back to you is, think of the energy required to run that robot, and how's it. You know what Bob said at the beginning about the whole energy flow? You think of a robotic artificial intelligence one doing it, you know? And I mean that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, isn't a better robot a nice person you could talk to? You know?
Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like, do you love gardening? Why let the bloody robot do it?
And just on that as well, I've just read some research that this thing of feeding the world with permaculture, and some of the most recent research has come out that has said, you know, only 1% of the population is currently involved in farming. And if we moved that to 10% of humans who are actively working the land through permaculture methods, that we would have enough food to feed the world even on business as usual scenarios. So
Can I just make a comment too in terms of where most of our food is grown? And I'm sure you would know a person called Vandana Shiva, who's a very activist in positive solutions in India based around small farms. She was here in New Zealand, just had a conference just last weekend. And we heard her too in Otaki, dear old Otaki, she came there. And she made this point that 75% of the population gets fed from farmers who are on small farms. Right? 75% of the population of the world gets fed by farmers on small farms, little farms. Highly productive, diverse things, most of them. And that's where I think the future is. I mean, I think we've just gone down a wrong alley for too long, you know? And whether technology can help us get back into the small farms, you know, they're talking about supporting the small farmers. They're the most productive ones. You know? As Bob says, it might take a little bit more people, as we want, don't we? Want to be involved, want to be connected, you know where the food comes from. So.
Cool. I'd just like to thank you so much. Yeah, it feels good.
Okay, about what do you believe is the future of the seed collection that Koanga is holding at the moment?
I thought that might happen, and I was kind of dreading it and kind of hoping it would happen. So we've got this collection of New Zealand heirloom seeds, which is about 800 different seed lines. And we've saved that collection because a group of people, mostly our age, who are now in our mid-60s, have worked for nothing for 30 years, basically. And we can't do it anymore because there are other things we need to do in our lives. So I'm actually, I only really, and this wasn't in my mind when I left home to come here, but it feels like I need to say that I actually asked Kenny at lunchtime, so what happened in America, because I know that he was really involved with all that stuff in America, and he basically just said straight back to me, it's the commons, and everybody has to pay for it. The government has to pay, or someone has to put, we actually can't do it anymore. We actually can't do it. So unless there's a group of people who want to save the seeds for the whole, they won't be saved.
I say yes. I'm stepping up. I'm sure there's other people who will.
The people who are asking from the technology world, they're asking for something that's digestible. You see, like you guys have amazing wisdom that they really want. They don't understand it. They grew up in a different world. We need to translate it to their world, so they can actually help.
Yeah, we'll need you to help us do that because we don't have the same. I don't have the same. I don't know their world.
Yeah, I really feel for Kay on this, and I was recently talking to somebody else that said that there's a herb place in New Zealand called Fragrant Herbs, and they're in the same situation. They've been saving seeds and saving plants for many years, but they're getting to the stage where they can't do it any longer. Who's going to step up and take it over? And it's a big problem all over the place.
Seeds to us.
I know.
Everybody can't do it. It's like, it's a job for the nation, and who cares? Like, who cares enough? We've been asking that question for a long time.
But it's in the real world, out there in the soil. You've got to do it.
Thank you very much for the work all of you do.